So thanks, everyone. Thanks for your attention and your time. So as Alex said before, the talk is about enabling greater influence in general. So it's not only for product designers and managers, it is actually for that influence. And before we go, I think I have a challenge here of running a poll, but I'll see if I can make it work. So the first question that I would like for you to run is not this one. Yes, it's that one. Sorry. So just answer, how many employees do you have in your organization? Sorry, it's the first time running a poll, so it takes a second. That's really great. Thanks for answering. We've got 40%, 50%. Okay. That's great. Can you see the results, everyone? So just the reason why I'm sharing this and we're talking about that, just to understand better for me and for yourself of the context of conversations. And I think the size of organization will change my examples and the way I talk to you about it. Then let's look at the second question that we're going to have is just think about your organization. What is your annual revenue? So there you go. Perfect. We can see that we have about almost 50%. I think that could be enough for us to move forward, but can we share it? Thank you. So as you see, quite a lot of people are having really big organizations with more than 10,000, but there are also good representation of larger sizes, and the revenue can move between 1 million to 1 billion. And we see that quite a lot of people are not sure. And I think one of the points of this talk will be that maybe we should know a little bit more about that. Maybe we should be interested and understand how that goes and how that works. But it's good that we see like a really good representation of all sizes of organizations. So I will try to have a good mix and explaining about those things right. Thank you. So let's start with the problem, right? So have you ever been on a project where you've done your research, you've done your workshops, you've done your measurements, roadmap, everything, and you know that something is a bit off? Maybe there's an untapped opportunity that you would like to communicate with others and you would like to get others to come on board, but no one really listens. And the real question is, why is that? Why does that happen? And there are a few people that talk about that, but Kim Goodwin is the first person that actually made that comparison for me. And she talked about the 5 stages of grief, that maybe someone is dealing with information that they're not ready to deal with. Maybe they're denying that. Maybe they're angry and they're just like, this is not my way to deal with it. This is not my problem. This is your problem. This is someone else's problem. There are a lot of ways to deal with it. But anyway, we look at it, actually looking at someone's individual context to why and how they're dealing with it. We're looking at organization, where there is a sociological perspective. And this is actually the approach that we're trying to take today to that. So more about what is this talk about. So we're not going to talk about silver bullets, not artifacts and processes that are going to magically work. We're not going to talk about best practice if they ever exist. I don't know if they do. But what we are going to look at is more the organization as a social system to help you manage your efforts, your messages, and the way you manage your effort, your energy to make that change that you'd like to see in that organization. Before that, let's talk about a little bit who I am. So I'm Itay Ziv. I'm a lead design strategist at Thoughtworks. This is, sorry, my motto is context is king, if you didn't get that from the first few slides. But I've a little bit about myself. So I worked in 8 countries, different languages, dialects, accents, then different sectors and in different types of organizations, from 5 people startup through government with 1 million people, employees in one of those departments, to non-for-profits, scale-ups whatever, and we will touch that in some of the examples. Something about what made me become a designer, because I was a marketer, I was an educator, I was a waiter, and I was a professional flying trapeze performer. So I have a little bit of everything in that. But I was always intrigued by the social factors of things, of why people behave in a specific way. What are the pressures? What are the values and the codes that we need to align? And what happens when people do not align to them? And what's their take on it? So I think I kept pushing and trying and challenging myself in different situations. I think one of the peaks of those self-testing was when I participated in Big Brother. That was the first season in Israel at the time. And I got to be a finalist just because I knew how to navigate the situation. I didn't win, but it was a good experience. So let's go back to our problem. So why no one listens? Why is that? What is really happening here? So when we look at the business as a social system, we have to accept that there is something that is in constant movement. It's something big that is really, really hard to steer and move them off their course. Maybe you will never be able to do that. So the key point that we're trying to take here is what can you do and what you shouldn't do when you try to influence that change. And we will focus on 3 tips. It will be about following the money, understanding the cultural contracts, and work the network. I'll do them one by one, and let's start with follow the money. So follow money means actually, what does the organization care about and how much do they care about that specific thing? So if you look back at your organization, try to think about the structure of it. How is the money allocated? So who reports to whom? Who's accountable for what? Who holds which budgets? And what value are they trying to get from that specific investment? By the way, this on the right, this is an org chart from the 1800s that I really had to share because it was just beautiful to see how they thought about the organization then and how we look at organizations in a lot of other diagrams. It's really fun to look at it this way. So to walk us through that example, I'll talk about a little situation that I was in. So I was a part of a big project for a large UK grocer. We're talking about revenues of about 30 billion pounds a year. And they were focused on doing what they call ERP modernization. So if you don't know what is an ERP, it's actually the heart and brain of retailers. And in this case, it was something that was bought in the 90s and the company kept customizing it and adding capabilities on it. And with time, it became such a massive beast that you can't even do anything without an after effect that can and may break a lot of things downstream. So they actually couldn't even upgrade to a newer version of that specific ERP. And it was so old that even that ERP and even Windows 7 was not giving any more service support. So if they would build something and it will break, all of those Windows and ERP will not give them support. So they thought about maybe we should not do anything. So it means that you can't keep developing, you can't create new business, you can't create new opportunities, and the business is blocked. So if we think about it, who's going to take the responsibility for this? And that decommission of that legacy system was assigned to the CTO, the Chief Technology Officer, with a very clear focus. Get the capability that we want, but don't forget the feature parity. What we've done till today needs to stay. Do not interfere in our 30 billion pounds business on a daily basis, because if something breaks, we have a problem. And do it ASAP, because we need that to be open, because the competitors are actually threatening us, and there's a lot of others that are coming in. So if we look at it from a hierarchy point of view, obviously there are a lot of people at the bottom under those people, but we could see that all the money was focused on that CTO. So while we were working on the projects, we noticed that there's some opportunities that should be taken advantage of while we're slicing the work, while we're building that roadmap. And, this is a 3, 4, 5 years project. You can't just wait 5 years to bring that value. You want to bring it today. But as we tried to come to the CTO and trying to talk about that, they were quite distant from it because they were thinking about, this is not my remit. I'm here for doing that decommissioning process. And there are other people who are in charge of the modernization or the digital transformation that we're talking about. And that's probably someone else that get that investment. So it's really weird that we're saying it that way, because you think about, this is a CTO. Well, they can talk directly to the CEO, they can talk to someone else. So are they the boss? Are they deciding how things are? So we have to think about how that money is allocated and to understand that there's always someone above, right? So it's not only the CTO, there are the owners of the business. And especially when we're talking about scale-ups, when we're talking about large enterprises, the owners are a bit distant from the operations of the business on a daily basis. So we have to understand that those people actually reporting to someone that needs the message to be very clear. And just to quote Peter Drucker, those who know is great. If not, please do your research. Business, it's easily defined. It's other people's money. It means that we're moving money, if it's from the customer to us, or if it's from the owner to an investment to get something to move, but it's always other people's money and it's moving. So those people who owns that money want to be communicated in a very simple way. And the simple way is like, this is a quote from Jared Spool, by the way, saying that we're investing money to increase value. And value could be money, could be service to members of the public, could be awareness to a cause. It's not really just money for money, but it's for a value. And the 5 executive priorities will be increasing revenues, decreasing costs, which means either selling more or promotions. If we're talking about decreasing costs, could be spend less. If we're talking about new business and market share, is maybe a stream that is untapped yet. Revenue from existing customers could be price change, and increasing shareholder value could be maybe a new promise, something like opening a research and development department, or saying that we're launching that new system, that new ERP in a quarter, but not in 5 years, right? So legacy modernization may have impact on all of those, and it is important, but before it's done, it's only costs to the business, and it's increasing costs, and it's not showing value in the short term. Therefore, it was really, really hard to move it forward. So what did we do? So we were thinking about, is there someone else who might care about that added value? And when we thought about it, it was quite obvious to us that the people who are using that system on a daily basis are the buyers of the category of that specific grocer. The buyers are the people who negotiated prices with the suppliers, who will organize the price, the promotions, and will decide where the products will go. If they're going to be using that new system or that new first slice, and we could show the value to them, they would be more interested and will get us more buy-in to the change, the simple incremental changes that we were aiming for. So we've tapped them and got to them and got a first slice that was actually focusing on delivering value immediately rather than a long term. So that's from a follow the money. So if we're talking about, again, that part of tip is think about those 4 things. First of all, what is the value of the key value of your project? Then can you translate it into one of the 5 executive priorities? Then find others that may benefit from that change. In that case, it was the head of buyers or chief commercial officer. And then frame your efforts and messages to align with those audiences. The second one is about understanding the cultural contracts. So what are the values? What are the codes? And do they have appetite for change in general? So this is going to be a little bit more theoretical, but please bear with me. I will make it a lot more practical really quick. So I don't know if you've heard about that term before, but the competing value framework. There was an attempt to try and make, to to find the themes that bring all organizations, successful organizations, together. And there was a couple, Cameron and Quinn, that found a way to describe them, and they create a matrix that moves between a flexible organization to a stable organization versus an internal focused organization to external focused organizations. And they gave names to the groups in the middle, to the groups in those quadrants. So we'll start with the clan on the top left. The clan are really focused on their collaboration, on the relationships, on the human development in this organization. And if you think about an example to such an organization, I don't know if you've seen the Wolves of Wall Street, but that, like that rhythm that we all should move together and we'll do it together and our message will come across and that will be efficient and successful. So that's an example to that. Under it, there's hierarchy, which is a more old-fashioned organizations or with more legacies that are more focused on control, on existing processes. People that are experts, SMEs, has a lot of opportunities to grow in their organization. There are also obviously some threats. How can you bring change in such organization? But we can touch that later. Then the adhocracy, which is more flexible, a little bit more external focused, would be more like startups. They have the space for creativity, for agility. We can, pivot whenever we want. Whiteboard ninjas could be really the strongest people in such organization. And in market, think more of the data-oriented large organizations that we have today as Facebook, Google, Amazon, etc. And it's not easy to go and say, all of our organization sits in one place. And in fact, I'll use that Grocer situation as an example. So that Grocer that we talked about in the last example, the organization was a very hierarchical organization that was really focused on their processes, on controlling, on SMEs of how doing things. But on the other end, there was the department that we're working on within tech of that organization that was more focused on, we have our processes, but there's also, we work for tech, we're doing tech, we're supporting tech. And then our team saw where the gap was and saying, we need more data. We need to push more towards understanding what is the reason why we're doing things. And that's one example of how you can map that. Another example that I can give was a Scaleup in the healthcare that I was working with. And they had 300 employees when we joined them, and they got like their D round of funding, and a lot of money came in. And our strategy as a team was, let's bring them and make them, instead of like pivoting every second, let's try to put them and make them more data oriented. And we started talking to them and tried, to use some of their approaches and terminologies. And then they said, we really like what you're doing. Come and work with another department, the AI department. The problem is that in this case, we didn't really understand where we are. And they were really, really focused on data. And when we tried to say, let's have a whiteboard session with 30 participants, people laughed at our faces like, do you have any data to support the need for us to sit together and talk about that? And whiteboard, who needs a whiteboard for this? So we have to think about where you're sitting and where you are. So what I would like you to do and to be able to do is to think about, where's your space? Not only where's your organization, your department, your team, is also where's your industry and maybe where you are and your approaches, and can you bring people to that direction, or do you have to move more to their direction? I'll run another poll, and I think someone is helping me from the back. So if you can help me with that next poll, it will be, please think for a second, where would you place your organization? Is it a clan? Is it a hierarchy? Is it a adhocracy? We can see there's a good share here. There's very good balance. So if we can share the answers already, we can see that there is a good split between clan hierarchy and adhocracy, and markets are not really represented here. I don't think that they're really represented in general, because it's really hard to do with to get substantial business to be focused only on that. But this is a good place to be, and I recommend start thinking about where your organization, where's your team, where's your department, where would you like to be? But let's just a sec. Let's talk about something else for a second. It's not enough that we're talking about the values and the codes of your organization. There's another question that says, if we are in a change, or the organization is always in a change, at what stage of that change are they? So there is a model that talks about that, but in general, if we think about it, a business, when they have a new idea, they will need people to influence and change that idea, that change that they want in selling that idea. So they need influences. The second one will be people that will take the authority and practice and validate those practices. And then the third one would be systems, processes, sometimes technology that builds in using and making that processes even cheaper or scalable. And then the last one will be an educator. So we can think about where the organization is, and we can also think about it, where do we operate best? And then if we can think that there's a little bit of discrepancy between those two, how do we navigate ourselves within that? Or how, well, can we be there at all? Or can we find someone that can help us do that? So to recap on understand that tip of understanding the cultural contracts, think about the values of your organization, the department, the team that you live, and how do they live by? And at what stage of the change are they and you are in? And where all of you in this, and can you align, and that doesn't align with your strengths? The third topic is around working the networks. We're talking about clusters, mavens, and brokers. These are terms that I'm going to break for you in a second. So usually when we talk about organizations, we think about, again, that structure of from top to bottom, how everything is just like allocated budgets and roles, responsibilities. But the truth is that most organizations look more like that, right? We have to accept that the relationships between people are not only transactional around work. We have tensions, we have groups, we have clusters of people that are connected to each other. Sometimes it's for reasons that are completely not professional. But there is even a further stage that we think about, because the previous one was quite messy. So maybe we can think about it in a better way, where we're drawing the number and the quality of the relationships that each person has. So to quote Malcolm Gladwell, the writer of Tipping Point and many other books like Blink, The Outliers, the David and Goliath, not the original one, but that book, it talks about the success of any social epidemic is heavily dependent on the involvement of people with a particular and rare set of social skills. There's a key word here, social epidemic, and I'll touch that in a second. A social epidemic is basically the diffusion of innovation, the way messages come across and this spread around the ether, around people, around groups. There's a lot of content around that if people want to keep digging into this. But in Gladwell's book, he talks about two main participants. And there are the mavens, which are information specialists, people who are counted or perceived as people that can give advice, that we want to hear what they think about. And there are the people who are the connectors and bring as many touch points as possible to those mavens or spreading that word. And we don't need to think about only about those terminologies. We can look at it even if you in the advertisement world, right? If you're a business that would like to get an influencer or a role model to promote your product, you're actually looking for a maven, right? For an information specialist. And how do you get to those people? You look for the agencies that manages them, right? And there will be the brokers that can get you to not only one role model or one influencer, they will get you to a group of them. So we don't have to think only about those terms in that way, but the key point is that there will always be people that we trust for that information. And who are those people, those mavens? The mavens could be sometimes a system architect. They could be an agile coach in your department of the CTO. But they could also be, someone who's a friend of a friend of a friend that has coffee with that specific person. We have to understand who they are and how can they help us move forward. So just as a quick example to how that could work. If I'm cheap, right, and I know that Brian and Frank are influencers in the business, and there are the mavens, and they can help me convince Bob to do X. What will be the best path for me? Who will be the best person for me to talk with? Will it be through Sue to Brian, and then maybe to Patrice, and then Frank, or how will it be? And probably most of you kind of caught it already, and the answer is probably Sally. Sally has the most connections, and Sally can bring me also to Sue, to Patrice, and also to the mavens that I'm looking for. So in many cases, you want to get to the mavens, and your best way is to going through the brokers. So some of the things that I've heard before was people saying, but I have no friends in the business. How do I get to those brokers? How do I get to those mavens? And I think that the first question, the first thing that you have to do is to correctly classify the relationships. So a lot of research proves that there's no real definition of friend and enemy in business because it's all in the context of work. So we have to look at people more as allies versus adversaries. There will be, not saying that it's not possible that you might have a friend or an enemy in the business, but we have to think about more like in that context-dependent situation. And what most research says is if you nurture your allies, there are tips of how to do that. Usually you'd say maintain the relationship on an annual basis at least. Then turn your adversaries to allies, make them closer to you, make them friends of yours, make them more positive, those relationships. And obviously, if you have enemies, keep them as distant as you can. So the question is, how do I convert my adversaries into allies? And the answer is, it's all about giving. So the 3 R's, you say, first of all, get the negative emotions away, right? Break it in different ways. Get a coffee with them, find a situation where you show something that could work for them. Then get that relationships to be established is by giving something. They will usually, there are different types of people. There will be people that will be just takers, but most of people will be matchers or even people that will give you even more than you gave them. And that kind of gives you the understanding of what should be the next step. Can we keep that relationship working? And then by rationality is actually to see how you can move together in to build more opportunities with that person. So giving is a key thing in that situation. So we're almost at the end. So we'll just talk and recap about those different things that the different tips that we've talked about. So as I said, follow the money, keep the project's key value, try to understand, can you speak in the 5 executive project priorities? Can you find someone who cares about those priorities or that change that you want to bring? And make sure that you always keep your messages around that. Otherwise, it's going to be really, really hard to move forward. Then the cultural contracts, understand how the organization is looking at changes. What do they believe that is efficient? What do they believe that is their key strengths and identify where they are in that change. Then work in the networks, find your brokers, find your mavens, try to get them on board, and always, always, always focus on giving, because that would work. So good luck and happy networking. This is the end of it. So I guess we have some questions, I guess, and we have last poll, and that's mostly for me. I don't know if you can give it there. So we don't have to look at it right now, but maybe we can address the questions first.
Thank you, Itay. Very, very nice, very engaging, very nice to see the context and the bigger picture and just put yourself into that. Yeah, just see yourself relative to this one, and at the same time also having those different ways to work the network and to work the system itself. Adriana put in a question, I think just jumping right to start again when you talked a little bit about like the grief and coping, and could you just go a bit more deeper into that one, and just about the connection between grief and the states there and how to cope with the change?
Yes, absolutely. So usually the reason why we showed that, I did show that model, is more when we're delivering news to someone, and why do they reject our news? And it's more for us to deal with the fact that they're not taking that information, because maybe you've been working on it, you did your research, you did your validation over it. You've invested a lot of effort in the artifact that tells the story, but they're facing that information maybe for the first time, maybe for the 10th time, but they're not dealing with the information as you are. And maybe they're invested in the other options a little bit different, a little bit more than yours. So it's more about us understanding why they react to our comments, to our questions in a specific way. So a denial would be, no, it's not possible, right? And anger would be, what are you talking about? And trying to, well, throw it at the messenger, right? And then negotiation would be something like, maybe if I do so and so, sorry, that would be bargaining. I think negotiation would be more like, yes, maybe if I'll do that part, it would be enough and not the full change that is required. Bargaining would be, yes, maybe, you know, someone else can do this, or, and then acceptance would be at the end of the day saying, okay, we have to do it. It's really, really hard. And we have to accept that when you come with such big news or such a thing that may not be in their agenda on a daily basis, you will have that reaction. But as I said before, that's a very individual context. And in many cases, it's impacted by the organizational context. And that's why most of that talk, this talk was focused on that.
Great, thank you. There's a second question coming up there, and I think I also can relate with that, and being so much like remote with this COVID situation and not having been in the organization itself, and it's very hard to just like observe people to get a feeling for the content. So how do you find the connections and identify the networks in this remote context where we just jump from Zoom to Zoom call or Teams to Teams call, and we just have those official organic runs we can browse through, but we like much of the interactions are just like hidden away and not visible anymore?
I agree. In a physical world, face-to-face, when we all working locally and at the office, it's by far easier, right? You can grab someone for a coffee, grab someone for a chat in the corridor. You can see who's going out for a coffee with whom. It's a lot easier, I agree. But I think in the hybrid world, or just fully remote, there are different ways to do it. And I think the key thing is about being in places that you not usually are. What does it mean? If there's community calls, I don't know, for the product people or design people, just talk there. Talk about the attempt, talk about the change that you're trying to see or to say. Find other trusted designers or product people or delivery managers that could care about that and can tell you, give you a tip. Go talk to X, go talk to Y. So there will be a lot more steps in this world, not kind of remote world, but it's still possible. And then when you discover a name, start testing, you know, like saying, oh, I've heard that John could be a really great person for that. I heard that Ellie, she's amazing and she knows stuff about that space. How do I get to her? Just throw the ball in the air, see who catches it, who touches it, where it goes. It will help you map those things. But it's really, really important. And I know that it's really, really hard. Another trick that I've seen in the past that I'm not a big fan of, but it's also possible, check their LinkedIn, right? See where they worked. See, I don't know, check on their Facebook or whatever. See what they are passionate about. Find a way to start a conversation with someone. If they like music, if they're collectors of something, maybe you find that interesting. Maybe you can start that conversation with them and start with, as I said, with the emotional side rather than like transactional. Oh, I'm doing so-and-so, you might be interested in that. Not so. It's not going to work that easily.
Thank you. We still have a couple of minutes, so if still anyone has a question, just write them into the chat, into the Q&A. What comes still to my mind, a little bit provocative in some ways, like when you did follow the money, trying to understand the contracts and the setting, and you work the networks and you really like tried in building the trust and all the other things. And when this all didn't work out, what do you do then? Like when you feel like...
Yeah. So this is challenging. It's a good question. So I think there are a few things that you can do. First of all, check if you're doing something wrong, right? I think we've talked about a few things. One is that cultural thing and that stage of influence. Maybe something in the way you're working, it's not working for that organization. Maybe, you know, maybe the artifact that you are used to use to deliver the messages is not enough. Maybe there's something that you need to do outside of this. And first of all, start with assuming that there's a large organization that has its ways, and maybe you're doing something in a wrong way to achieve that change that you want to see. And yes, maybe you will never be able to change it, right? Then I think the other element is start small and local. Yes, maybe the organization is not changing, but maybe in your team it can. So I think if I said, like, instead of trying to think about the organization, how do I change the organization? I start saying, go backwards, start with yourself, see what you can change. If you can change yourself and see what you can do better, then start in your team. And if your team is going to work, start going out and further. Because as we said, it's a social epidemic, right? We can move things forward. We can influence for each other. Then I would say also try to find again how you can get that influences, right? To get that influences outside, because maybe they don't want to hear you. Maybe it's in a hierarchical organization and you're a member of a delivery team. So you have to accept that maybe you need someone who's a bit stronger, that is a maven that can influence. And maybe it's not the right place for you.
Maybe it's not the right place, but maybe it also takes time. Thanks for the answer before, and just like connecting to the next one. So like relationship building takes time in there. But what do you do if you need to be fast and create that change very fast? Like in Thoughtworks, we are a consulting company. We are there like from a couple of weeks to a year. So like, what do you do? Yeah.
So there are few opportunities that you have. So I agree that time is a factor, right? Like when an organization decides to make a difference, a change, it will take about 3 to 5 years to see that change, right? Until it actually leaves as a part of that organization. But Thoughtworks has the opportunity, or to be, fortunate enough to communicate with the key stakeholders and to have that hard conversation with the right stakeholders to say, listen, you're investing millions into this. There is an opportunity to talk here, to connect you, and maybe help your stakeholder, which let's say the CTO, say, we can help you establish stronger relationships with the chief commercial officer or the chief operations officer. How can we help you help them? So we have that ability, that direct channel with those stakeholders. If you are in a startup that is small, it's just a knock on the door.